Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So it's my great pleasure to introduce Jay Liu. Jay is a principal researcher at Microsoft Research. His research interests root in understanding and managing physical properties of computing, and he's a distinguished scientist of ACM since 2011. Jay has been a partner of several of our projects, and it's really a pleasure to have him here. And he's going to be presenting low energy location sensing for mobility.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about some system support for doing science. In particular, one property that a lot of data are relied on, and we use it every day, the notion of location. A long history of location sensing, if you like, but things really changed since 1977 when the GPS system is launched. And after that, it goes through this normal from bulky to smaller devices, from military applications to civil applications, from dedicated devices for GPS navigation to a more ubiquitous service that we see on our phones. Location is everywhere. Today, for example, we look at Windows Phone apps, 10% of them use location services. And then there are dedicated devices like photo tagging, like healthcare, scientific applications like water flow management, animal tracking. Lots of them use GPS as the fundamental basic location service. Unfortunately, they all treat GPS as a black box. This is a chip, a module you buy from off the shelf, and you integrate it into your sensors, and you're done with it. And that suffers a lot of issues. For example, the energy and the availability issues, right? GPS modules, they consume a lot of energy. We all know from our experience, if you turn on your phone for continuous GPS sensing for 6 hours, the phone will just run out of battery. The other issue it has is availability. If you're indoors, you don't get GPS location and you lost track of the entity you wanted to track. So this work is really try to solve or tackle those two challenges to give low energy GPS sensing that you can integrate into your sensors, and to look at another way of doing indoor location sensing. So you can have continuous sensing through your applications. In order to describe it, I'm going to go through a little bit of how GPS works. We know there are 32 satellites for the US GPS system. There are 32 satellites in the sky. They're time synchronized to nanosecond level accuracy. And there are ground stations that manage them. And they send up these trajectory information, the so-called ephemeras, which got broadcast down from the satellites. And the time and trajectory of these parameters are sent in a very slow data rate. These are sort of outer space communications, right? The data is at 50 bits per second. And that's the key limitation of why GPS modules take so much energy to run, because you have to decode all this information in a very low speed. The receiver estimates location using essentially two parameters. One is it estimates the time of flight from the satellite to your device. And it solves the equation given where the satellite is at that moment and the time of flight. It solves the equation in the least square sense typically to find out your device location. And that computation process is relatively simple, but estimating the time of flight and the exact locations of the satellite takes a lot of effort. In particular, your typical GPS receiver will go through the following processes. The first step it does when it receives the signal in the baseband or intermediate frequency is to do the acquisition process. This is to find out which satellite it can see, and in particular, the Doppler and code phase of that, the signal coming out of the satellite. So what it essentially look for is a spike in the Doppler and code phase space. If it sees a spike, it says, okay, I see that satellite. If it doesn't see a spike, it says, I don't see that satellite. And that information is useful for calculating the final location. Then you go through the tracking. Tracking can do, so you can do acquisition every millisecond. You continuously do tracking every millisecond in order to be able to decode this 50 bits per second information that comes down from the satellite. Every 6 seconds you got a timestamp, so you get a better chance of getting the timestamp information. Every 30 seconds you got the full ephemeris. So this is our experience with car GPS. It takes 30 seconds when it first starts up to acquire satellite, and that's what it was doing to decode all that information. Your phone is a little bit smarter. It has the ephemeris information from the network. It only decodes the timestamp, which takes 6 seconds. So this is your experience when you turn on the phone to use GPS. It takes about 6 seconds on average to get your first location. So all those information feed into the least square computation, and that's a little bit computation on the device itself to get you that long. So we look at this process, we think what has the device has to do versus things we can offload for application that we don't need turn-by-turn navigation. We can hopefully do it in the cloud so we can save the device side of energy consumption. For example, code phase, you have to come from the device. This is specific to that position. But other things like ephemeris, which is the trajectory of the satellite, NASA published this in the cloud service. You don't really need that in the device. Timestamp is a tricky question. Traditionally, people have to decode it from the message that comes down from the satellite. But there is a trick, the so-called the course time navigation, that will avoid you to decode anything from the satellite. The way it works is to leverage the speed of light. It's so fast. If you have a reference location, you have something nearby, you know its location already, then the propagation delay for the RF signal leaving from the satellite to your unknown device versus to that known location is going to be by and large the same up to the millisecond part. And the sub-millisecond part, which is what the code phase will give you, and that we need to decode from the device themselves. So given a reference location, we don't really need, and a rough timestamp, this is so-called the course time, we don't really need to decode anything from the satellite. That saves all this process of decoding information, which has to keep the GPS module always on. But what if you don't have a reference location? This is something you tag onto an animal, you don't know where it goes. Then there's a deeper method you can do based on the Doppler angles that you can do intersections. So each of the satellite, when it moves with the speed, and when you look at the satellite from the ground, you see a relative speed. NASA also published the absolute speed of that satellite. The two speed give you an angle, and that defines a cone leaving from the satellite going towards the Earth. And you do multiple intersection of those, you get a rough reference locations in the order of kilometers. But that's good enough to give you a reference to use the code phase to refine it. So that's what we did. For the device side, it only logs raw GPS signal as small as 2 milliseconds, since the time synchronization issues and so on. And then it has a reasonable timestamp that tagged to that chunk of data. That got sent into the cloud. We have a cloud service that would do the acquisition like what typical GPS would do, but in software. And then it gets the satellite ID. It look into the NASA orbit database to get the ephemeris. Using Doppler and intersection, we got reference locations. Using the code phase, ephemeris reference location, and device timestamp, we plug into this course time navigation process and give you the lat-long locations. So that's what we did. We built a sensor. Some of you may have seen this last night, which looks like this right now, which is essentially a GPS logger with a very low power microcontroller to log the data onto an SD card. If you look at the power consumption, it's dramatic. So this is a trace, may not be very clear from your view. We have 2 milliseconds of sampling time of taking the GPS samples. and then about 30 milliseconds of time to write it onto flash. So if you calculate the current usage of that, on average we use 4 milliamp, if you time 30, like 10 milliwatts of power, and 30 milliseconds to log the data. What it translates into is even with 5 of these chunks for better accuracy, we use 2 millijoules of energy versus your phone GPS use about 2 joules for every location log. In a sense, we're 1,000 times more energy efficient. And in theory, this translates into, if you have a pair of AA batteries, it will last for a year and a half to do continuous GPS logging at 1 second granularity. We built a web service. I'm going to show you for processing offline data. This is a data log we collected. This is about 1 megabyte of data that I took when I was riding from San Jose Airport to one of the Microsoft labs. And right now, in this moment, we're sending that to the cloud service, and the location resolved that service comes back. This gives you a sense of the performance through this wireless network and so on to the cloud service. We have 4 instances of the service running. For every individual data points right now, it takes about 4 seconds to resolve it. And I give you also a sense of the accuracies and so on. There's one outlier, so I'm going to give you more statistics on the performance. We evaluated over 1,500 traces, both the moving traces and static traces. The median error is about 11 or 12 meters from the ground truth. The mean error is about 20. The max error is pretty big. We're still looking at ways to reduce that. If you look at the distribution, 30 meter is sort of what we believe the system can do. More than 80% of the data is within 30 meter accuracy. We also break down to the number of satellites. That's a key parameter that determines the accuracy. Once you have 7 or 8 satellites in view, actually the 30 meter mark goes to more than 90%. So more than 90% of the samples we get better than 30 meter accuracy. So it really matters how you define or design the RF circuits and so on. One of the other things we care about is the device time synchronization accuracy, how much time error we can tolerate on these devices. So this is an evaluation of that. So we can tolerate up to 1 minute of time error. So you synchronize the device at the beginning of your experiment, you let it run. As long as within a month you have a GPS sample, the clock won't drift more than a minute. And then after every GPS resolution, we get the new timestamp and we can use that to correct future samples. So time synchronization is really not an issue in these devices. I'm going to switch gear a little bit since I don't have a lot of time. I'm going to talk a little bit about indoor location sensing. There are lots of applications people are looking at now to study human beings and behaviors and so on. One of the key location metric there is the indoor activities and indoor location. Indoor location has, since GPS doesn't go indoor, has been primarily done in a very different way, using signature-based approaches. So basically, you profile indoor space. There are RF signals or other signals you can use as signatures, either dedicated infrastructure, you send out beacons, or opportunistically based on Wi-Fi and other things. Wi-Fi is probably the most popular one right now. And then if another device sends the similar signature, then you'll say, aha, I've been here, and that's the location. It suffers several limitations. Wi-Fi is a bad signal. It's absorbed by human body. It's with more or less people, the signature changes. It changes over time and all that. We, in this particular work, look at a very different kind of RF signal, which is FM radio. This is sort of your standard 50-year-old technology. Even if you go out of this building, actually, you see one of these towers. This is a AM and FM tower, as I figured out today. So the good thing about FM radio is they actually penetrate building very well. We all know we can receive FM radio indoors. human and small furniture movement, like the arrangement of the chairs in this room, for example, won't change the FM signature. There are a lot of channels that give the possibility of defining a diverse signature that we can use to identify a place. The other benefit is the receivers, with all these years of refinement, the receivers can be done really, really low power in the milliwatt order. So, but on the other hand, there are not that many FM towers out there. This is the FM towers near Seattle area. There's about 20 of them. People have tried this before, use FM radios for outdoor location signature, and the performance was really bad. It was lucky if they can get city block level granularity. What we're leveraging here is the building structure actually create unique signatures for FM radio that from one room to the next, because there's a wall in between, you can actually see very different FM structures or signals. So we did an empirical study at 3 places. One is this office building, or Building 99 at Microsoft, a mall in the Seattle area, and an apartment in Maryland, intern's house. And we use a FM development board that allow us to log 4 different metrics: signal strength, signal to noise ratio, multipath indicators, and frequency offsets. And we use 32 channels to build a signature database. And this is what we get. With RSS alone, we got 87% accuracy for room level location repeatability. Meaning if you profile a room with certain signatures, we come in there again, 87% of the time, we identify which room we were in. If we combine all 4 FM signatures, we got about 81%. So this is not that dramatic from Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi alone also get 88%. So roughly at the ballpark, we're dealing with RF signals and they're noisy and so on. But the good thing is the signature, the error distribution of Wi-Fi and FM is very different. If we combine the two, we actually got 98% accuracy of determining which room you're in a fairly complex building. Give you some intuition of why it works good. Wi-Fi give you sort of good granularity in tens of meter range, because there are a lot of more Wi-Fi stations and they're dense. But FM give you much finer granularity based within that 10-meter range because of the wall and so on. So if you combine the two, because the two signatures behave very differently, you actually get better chance of identify where you are. We did more evaluation in terms of time and space. Wi-Fi behave really bad if you don't profile it very often. So this is after a month so we collect data in 1 month. After a month, we did the same, using the same database and tried again. Wi-Fi goes down to about 50%. This basically says Wi-Fi have to profile every week. But FM doesn't go down as much. Right? So you can profile it at a much lower frequency. And with more database you build, actually the performance goes up. So as long as you profile, it accumulates and the performance goes up. Just to summarize the energy consumption piece, if you use like mobile devices like cell phones as your sensing platform, cell tower scanning is the cheapest way, but it gives you probably kilometer level accuracy. GPS, the cloud offload GPS receiving the way we're doing is very, it gives you about 30-meter range accuracy, but it's very power efficient. FM radio give you a few meter accuracy indoors. You spend a little bit more. Wi-Fi scanning actually you take more time and energy to scan Wi-Fi than FM radio. Your phone, AGPS, when it's successful, it takes about a few seconds to get the location, but it can be very accurate. If it fails, it actually takes a lot of time to realize it doesn't log to any satellite and fail. So there's a sort of a spectrum of location sensing capabilities based on your energy requirement, your accuracy requirement. You can mix and match, combine them into your application. So looking ahead, what we're doing about this, we are building the next module is about this size, which is this is the GPS receiver module that's sort of refined from this sensor. And we expect people to use it. So we're going to open source the hardware design that people can use it, integrate into your own application and your own platform. We're going to open the cloud service. As long as they send us the data with the right format, we're going to process it and give you a location. We'll keep working on, from the research side, improving the accuracies and speed. So really the message is there are really a spectrum of location sensing that has the opportunities for us to build devices that can be lighter, smaller, they will last longer, and have broader range of applications than just the standard off-the-shelf GPS modules you can get today. Right, with that, thank you.
Any questions? Any questions? Nope. Oh, Chris.
One of the most important things for environmental sensors is being weatherproof. So it's great that it has very long lasting, and it's super that you can identify exactly where you are. But imagine if I were to, say, deploy this in a river and want to see how potentially, the river flows down in association with maybe bathymetry data. So how well does it work in that type of condition?
So this is what people do today, right? That's exactly what people do in river. This is a project at Berkeley, civil engineering department. And what they did was they built a floater that's sort of sealed, and they put a cell phone in there. They throw it in the water, down the river, have this fishing net to capture it. It lasts for a few hours. That's the amount of data they can collect. With capabilities like this, you can have much smaller ball of floaters, rubber duckies if you like, right? Throw them into the water, catch them at the downstream, or have them at certain point upload the data, right? If it went past a base station or something, trigger it to upload the data, then you can have these disposable sensors, just let them flow. That's a much finer granularity. Today, well, this is very expensive to do any one of those sensors, and the granularity, because of the weight and the size, you can sense the finer grain water flow. But with a smaller sensor, the granularity will be much better.
We do a lot of work with animal tracking with GPS, GSM, VHF transmission. The old one is VHF. And now you have satellites that can give you radio colors at a good price, although expensive. What is the main advantage of your technology compared to what is used now broadly on wildlife tracking?
So one is weight, right? It's very small. And the cost, because it's not a full-blown GPS module, it's just a front end. It doesn't need that much silicon to process it on the device. And because it's low energy, you don't need that big of a battery, which is majority of the weight, where the majority of the weight come from. And so all those are benefits. You can have something smaller and lighter and cheaper. And you can add your own radio to it, right, to collect the data wirelessly. Right now, in this particular device we built, you pop up an SD card, you plug it into a PC or a mobile phone, and you upload the data. Obviously, for wild animal tracking, you don't necessarily want to capture the animal repeatedly and upload the data, but you can have these short-range radios like Zigbee, like Wi-Fi, but only turn them on opportunistically when they're near a base station, and upload the data that way.
Any other questions? No? I do have one. So you kind of touched it when you mentioned the river and a little bit of Christian scenario, but What are the scenarios that were not possible before, or that you would enable through this technology? Or at least one that you think is going to be greatly beneficial.
So again, has to do with the granularity of location sensing. So one of the things we collaborate with was scientists in Australia. They're trying to track so-called the flying fox, which is a kind of bat that can travel like 100 kilometers per night to eat fruits and spread seeds and so on. They're interested in tracking them. And the challenge there is, for one, they go out at night. So even solar panel won't work, right? And but the good thing is they actually come back to roughly the same location. Right now they can only get one sample per 30 minutes because of the energy constraints and the weight. They carry about 30 grams of weight. So with this, we're looking at much more finer granularity of tracking. And solar panel to charge during the day and use them at night will become feasible, which was not feasible before.
Great. Any other questions? No? So thank you, too.
Thank you.
And now we have Christian Bonasic, who is an associate professor in the School of Agriculture and Forestry at PUC Chile.
Right, thank you very much. First of all, I'm not a computer engineer, but I brought one with me, Andrea, so for any problem, she will defend me from your questions. Basically, what I want to tell you today is about our software, which is being developed for the last 2 years, thanks to the support of Luxir and Microsoft Research. First, I want to say a few words about what I believe are the main problems to comply with the fourth paradigm in Latin America in terms of how we share data, how we know and use IC technologies, and how difficult it is for the case of wildlife conservation to collect the data from the species. In an era of intensive data generation, we have the problem that we still know little about endangered species. Can we go backwards, please? Can you move backwards or not? Another one? There. Sorry. We still know little about endangered species. Many animals are not easy to detect, are cryptic or nocturnal, and population density of many endangered species are very low. Also, in Latin America, due to the constraints, economic constraints, and the vast areas of wilderness that are still remnant, it's very expensive to conduct surveys. Somehow, incidental encounters or tourists or even professionals from other countries that come on visit can encounter a wild animal and take a picture of them or take a record. That information is gone or missing, is not used by conservationists. On the other side, we have the knowledge change. When you talk to people who are not from the ICT world, they are shy or they don't want to explore tools that could be complicated for them. So they have GIS experts in one office, they have database experts in other, and they have the managers in another place. But they don't talk to each other, and the things and the tools are very specialized. So how we break that barrier? And the last barrier that we have is that you can have in a single country, in Brazil or in Chile, for example, the Ministry of the Environment owning data and using their own databases, the Ministry of Agriculture using data and owning their own databases, and they don't talk to each other. And when they transmit information between different bodies, governmental bodies, universities, or even NGOs, the way that they transmit the information is through a PDF file or a comment or a phone call. So we want to break those barriers by having something collective and open. Also, cloud computing is not really well used or used massively. And many historical information is stored in papers, emails, or without being utilized. So citizen science may play a role on this. And that's why we developed LifeAndis. But LifeAndis, compared to other citizen science software around the world, there are many, is different in the way that it's building blocks from local to global. And it's also a tool that allows you to upload, share, and visualize and do analysis with the information for management purposes. So it's not just fun and a learning process, as we have in a multimedia encyclopedia. Backward, please. As we have a multimedia encyclopedia embedded within the software. Can you go backwards once? Thank you. And, oh, again, sorry, wrong button. Backwards again. Backwards, please. There. So the system has the problem now that we need to think how we share information but makes this information available for everybody. And everybody, I mean scientists, park rangers, conservationists, and people at large. So in order to accomplish this task, this challenge, we have thought that some Microsoft tools can be useful to integrate in a platform with mobile devices and a web-based platform. The way that we can enter information, share information by uploading, sharing, and visualization of the information. We also did some study cases now. We collected and rescued historical data from environmental impact assessments that were done in Chile for the last 25 years. And we encountered that only a few amount of data, more than 600 reports, only we could encounter 350 records of reptiles and less from amphibians that were located with a timestamp and a location from many, many studies. So, but that baseline information is useful for us to know where the species are distributed. And if we have that information, we can do forecasting. So, for example, this is the case for the reptile. The database was loaded from historical data. We found that 2 species are the most common, 45 species in 14 regions. 1 region has more records than any other, and the most common species reported in these environmental impact assessments. And the exact location of each sighting is now available in LifeAndis. And that information is building up by users now in our country. We have more than 2,000 records, and it keeps running for 840 species, which is our entire biodiversity for birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. We have more than 300 users. And the next steps are to move and expand LifeAndis to North America, to a binational park with Bolivia as a small study case. And in the future, we expect to increase the number of species that we can handle and survey and integrate into insects, sea life, plants. We have several challenges in order to jump into the next step: database expansion, how we move into a no relational database. And I will leave Andrea with you to explain some of the challenges from the point of view of computing.
LifeAndis application has 2 main components. The first one being the website, and the other is an API of Windows Communication Foundation API that aids to use mobile devices connected to LifeAndis, sharing a common database between the website and the mobile applications. LiveAnde's main strong point is the data visualization it allows. Microsoft Silverlight and its pivot viewer have been essential pieces of the visualization that LiveAnde supplies. Also, with the available information using Link and its query capabilities, we have been able to do great data analysis. Also, with Bing Maps, we've been able to display all the information that's geocoded in LiveAnde's database. This is the constellation of Microsoft tools that LiveAnde uses on its main components. For sightings, we use ASP.NET with SQL Server, using polygons to detect where the species are located. For visualization, we use mainly Microsoft Silverlight, but now we're moving to HTML5. And also Bing Maps and LinkQ for statistics and data mining of the sightings. Right now, LiveAnde is being used by park rangers, scientific community, and decision makers of wildlife preservation in Chile. But future steps includes Bolivia and North America. So right now, we are facing a big challenge. How do we make LiveAnde's growth? LiveAnde in this context is about to migrate to Windows Azure platform to ensure scalability and availability. This migration brings two main challenges for us. Our database will be adapted to SQL Azure, and because of the scalability and availability of it, we need, considering this new scenario, to tweak how we use Bing Maps today to take advantage of this faster database. Also, is it possible to use SQL Azure in conjunction with SQL Spatial to enrich the geocoded data that we are uploading today to LiveAnde? How do we adapt the Windows Communication Foundation API that we are using today to run with Windows Azure at its maximum possibilities? How do we make all these mobile devices, phone, Surface, to communicate with these new LiveAnde? Summarizing, LiveAnde is now facing the challenge to use all the cloud power to this new stage. We need to enrich our geocoded data, maybe using audio, video, and sound, in conjunction with the GPS data we are now receiving. One backward, please. No, that was a surprise. So, we are now facing the challenge of migrating LiveAnde to Windows Azure. We want to enrich our geocoded data with new types of information to attach to every sighting. Also, we want to take advantage of the cloud services to extend LiveAnde to other mobile devices. And also, we want to try to develop an algorithm for image processing to recognize the photos being uploaded to the system using Windows Azure processing capabilities.
Right. So just to finish, sorry about the mistakes with the remote control. And just to finish, we want to tell you that our next step is to do LiveAnde for Manhattan, particularly for Central Park. We have a request from a colleague that works in conservation in New York, and they want to do a citizen science project in Central Park. So we're very proud to say that we hope that in the next few months we will have LiveAnde completely renewed and written for English speakers to do a citizen science project in New York. We are open to establish new collaboration with other countries and start block by block building LiveAnde from local to global. In order to do that, we would like to suggest the same partnership that we have developed in our country, which is conservation biologists or wildlife ecologists like us working together with computer scientists, building this application according to the needs that we need to solve in the ground, from simple to more complicated, from local to global. That is the key for LifeIndex success. We have new partners now in Mexico. We are hoping to start something as well in Colombia. And we are receiving several requests to start expanding LifeIndex as a tool for conservation. Finally, I would like to say that we have a little video of 4 minutes that Laxir and Microsoft Research prepared, and perhaps the organization committee could show that video at the end of the day if they want to. Thank you.
Any questions?
What are your thoughts about handling the fact that reportings from tourists and so on may not be very accurate? In some cases, they may be very accurate because you have eco-tourists who go to see birds or things, so they are fairly well trained, but then you have other tourists who are not very well trained. So how do you deal with the accuracy problem?
Within the system, we have options to allow and to assist you in the identification process, and you can also, we can interact with the users, sending messages or asking for revision. But we need to understand that the whole concept of sharing data and using citizen science is not necessarily always correct. What it means is that the cloud of data gives you a trend. For example, for the case of Chile, you cannot enter a monkey or a crocodile because it's not in the list of species that you are constrained. And you are also constrained geographically to enter only species and animals in the terrestrial land of Chile. So there are some barriers that impede you to make mistakes, but we have also the fact that you will always have some mistakes.
So just to follow up quickly, that means there's a trade-off, right? So if you help the tourists with their accuracy, you may miss a rare event, right? So for example, it happens fairly often that birds will show up in places that they are never expected to because a storm will blow them or something like that, right? So if you limit the input that citizens can do, it improves accuracy in some ways, but it may mean that you will miss rare events. And that was the whole point, right, was to record rare things and take advantage of the crowd.
You're quite right. That's a very important point. Somehow, we need to be aware that we could encounter even a new species, right? So the system of reporting that has to be inside the software, regardless that it's not in the list. That's particularly important in dynamic ecosystems like in Latin America, with so many places that are still unknown. So in that sense, every country who will have LifeIndex has a set of curators who are specialists within each taxa, because you don't have one specialist for every single living species in the world. But in order to also argue in favor of these restrictions, I have to say that some other citizen science or open softwares allows you even to invent a scientific name or to put an elephant in the middle of Sao Paulo. And then the whole concept of contributing to conservation and science is more difficult to grasp as something that will be useful. But this is a compromise.
Any other questions?
Hi, thank you, and we appreciate what you're doing, because I have the experience working in natural resource department. does your system include some kind of report? For example, we had like a tiger that no one has seen that for 40 years, but they used to see the trace, the footprints. Do you have this kind of capability that someone report this kind of,
Exactly. Life Andes gives you a menu of opportunities. You can register a track. You can register the actual animal. You can even enter that somebody told you that an animal was there. So then we can with Pivot Viewer, we can search and separate different kind of information. When you create your account also, you also self-assess your level of expertise. So the idea of Life Andes is to create a community around the species and to close the gap between nature and people. And the multimedia encyclopedia that is built in is done only using Bing resources for searching with an algorithm that allows you to find exactly the animals that you are using. For example, if you put in any search engine a mountain lion or cougar, you will find the Cougar American football team as the first hit. So we develop a way that when you enter into our encyclopedia, you will have pictures, videos, the IUCN information for the species, and the factual information for the species and not for the American football team. I'm sorry if somebody's from the Cougars team here.
Okay, we may have time for one more question. No? So thank you, Chris.
Find a lot of wild animals in New York.
Who knows? Bats are very interesting there.
So thanks, Christian. And now we have Professor Carlos Joly. He has an extensive biography, but I'll just say that he's a professor and researcher at the Biology Institute at UNICAMP, and he will be presenting the use of database and information systems to improve public policies of biodiversity conservation and restoration.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I think that Juliana has set up this very well, having Christian Bonasik speaking before about the Life Andes and how to track and register endangered species. I'm going to talk about a system that we developed for the state of São Paulo for biodiversity. So when we talk about biodiversity in Latin America, we are talking about big data. It's the continent with the largest amount of species of all vertebrate groups and all plant groups. So there's a lot of information to be organized. We also have a very large community, ethnic community that gave origin to the people from Latin America, and obviously interfered with biodiversity by selecting species or selecting varieties of species. Like other places in the world, Europe in the 1500, US in the 1800, São Paulo state in the 1900 went to a period where most of the forest was cut and replaced by coffee, was the main coffee plantation state. Together with the forest, we also have these areas of Cerrado. This is the savannas of Brazil. And what's left from the Cerrado are more or less 8,000 little fragments. There are less than 20 fragments that are bigger than 400 hectares. That's the minimum size for a keeping population of some of the large mammals. So, São Paulo state, we've lived with three realities. We have very large cities like São Paulo, Campinas, the metropolitan area. We have a very well developed landscape for coffee, sugarcane, and cattle. And we also have some pristine areas well preserved. So when we started the discussion about developing a system for biodiversity in the state of São Paulo, we faced this challenge that we have a lot of data, but very little of understanding and even less of sustainable use of biodiversity. So the challenge was to develop a system where we could bring together the information, train people in biodiversity, and also use this for policy improvement. So we started a program, for PASPI, the Biota program was started in 1999, based on the Convention on Biological Diversity that was signed in 1992, and working with all kinds of organisms, from microorganisms to higher plants and vertebrates, terrestrial, freshwater, and also marine, and all kinds of studies, inventories, taxonomic reviews, to landscape ecology, and also the human dimensions of biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. So the first step was to be able to share data. It's important to have a standard way of collecting that data. So we had 2 years of fight among biologists because we needed a single record system for people that were working with microorganisms or with birds or with bats. So in the end, we managed to establish a data bank structure where on your right you have all the taxonomic information of the species. On your left you have all the metadata. The project that collected it, the researcher, when it was collected, where it was collected, the coordinates. And we also developed a digital map of the remnants of vegetation in the state of São Paulo that allowed us crossing the information from field observations with remote sensing to map 34 different types of vegetation in the state. We also recover crossing data from soil, climate, and old maps of vegetation, the distribution of vegetation, the original distribution of vegetation in the state. So, oops. Could you go back? Mais? Obrigado. So this is the original vegetation. You have the rainforest along the coast. You have the pine forest or the Mancaposo forest tree in the southern, in the limit with Paraná. Then you had the semidecidus forest in this blue, greenish, and then the yellow is the Cerrado. So this was what could be the vegetation of the state before human interference. And that's what's left. So almost all the semidecidus forest is gone. You have only one large bit here. That's the state park. Most of the pine forest has gone as well. And you have left some of the rainforest along the coast because the mountains were too steep to plant coffee, not because somebody thought it was important to conserve. Having the maps and having the database of species, we developed the tools to cross information so we could get a name of species, look it up in the map the distribution of the species where it's been collected and sampled, and you could, from the map, go back to the data bank and get all the information, who collected it, when it was collected, all the coordinates, and also the list of species that was collected in that area. So after 10 years, we had a data bank with more or less 12,000 species and more than 100,000 records for these species. The vegetation maps and a system that was integrated, working with Linux server, Postgres, and using standard protocols. So any query will go through the data bank of species and also the data bank of maps and the vegetation information. We also worked with the biological information that was collected in the past. So what was in museums, herbariums, and connected these collections. So the system now has 200 collections, almost 4 million registers online from 315,000 species occurring not only in São Paulo state. The system has been increased for the whole of Brazil. And we also started to develop a sub-program to look for molecules of economical interest. One of the main products, apart from publishing and training people, we've trained more than 200 PhD students in a period of 12 years. In 2008, we decided to work with the State Secretary of Environment and also with some NGOs to try to produce a map of priority areas for conservation in the state. So we realized that we were very naive at the beginning, thinking that by having all the information available in data banks of open access, the manager or the politician, the state secretary, employees would use that information to improve policies. It doesn't work like that. You have to work through the information in a way that they can be used. So what we did was we went through the data bank, we've cleaned all the data, we've made absolutely certain of the identification, so using taxonomies, trained in each group to ratify the identification. So we ended up with a list of more than 5,000 species of plants. We have around 7,000 species in the state and large numbers of other groups as well. Crossing that with the maps where we had the areas of the remnant of the cerrado or semi-deciduous forest, an index of size and format of that remnant, proximity with other fragments, and so the connectivity, the possibility of connecting with other fragments, together with biodiversity information on lists of species, endemic species, endangered species, and also the presence of invasive species, so risk of invasive species. We've produced a set of maps that not only showed the areas where it was important to establish new conservation units and to preserve, but we discovered that in the state of São Paulo, to recover population of large mammals, mainly from the cerrado and semi-deciduous forest, we needed to restore corridors of forest, reconnecting fragments. It was not only conservation was not enough, so we needed a program of restoration. So this map, together with a book that came with all the data behind each of the indications, started to be used by the government to improve policies on biodiversity conservation, either by establishing new conservation units or by establishing rules for the restoration of forests using the number of species that should be used and so on. So also for planning the expansions of sugarcane. So everything that's red in that map is area where it's forbidden to plant sugarcane in the state. So all the areas we pointed as important for conservation and reconnection of are here in red, and also all the area that's of the rainforest. So now we have more than 20 legal instruments. This goes from decrees, laws, and resolutions that start saying, based on the results of the biota program, the governor decides to establish a new conservation unit. So it's being actually used, and now we are moving a step forward on that, and still this year we are going to make a joint call for projects with the State Secretary of Environment on targets, species, invasive species, and also better knowledge of some areas of the state that we don't have enough information for policy decision. And people that were looking at molecules that have economical potential also did a nice job. Now we have more than 5 patents, and they still tell me, they did that in 2002 to convince us to start the program, that in 10 years we are not going to need FAPESP's money anymore. We are going to live on the profits from the patents we have. They said it in 2002. It didn't happen yet. Sometimes perhaps. So this history of the program has been published by Science in an article on the Policy Forum. And all this together made us strong enough to propose to FAPESP that they should go renew the support to the biota program for another 10 years. It was started in 1999. for 10 years, and now we managed to get it renewed until 2020. So we have another 10 years to run. This is the amount of money that FAPESP has been investing on the program, and since it's been renewed, that amount of money went even up. So we are, last 2 years, we are over $5 million being used in the program. Restoration became one of the main targets for us. So understanding restoration, it's possible to recover forests. All this area here of forest has been planted 10 years before. But if we can do this with plants, we don't know how to do this with animals. We don't know how to keep genetic diversity, how to reintroduce species on the nature. And they are as important as the plants because they are pollinators and dispersers and so on. So the living forest will need the animals there as well. We are putting a lot of effort in producing house material for education, primary, high school education, something that it was on the original plan, but we didn't very well in the first 10 years. And one of the activities that we are having is a cycle of conferences that's focused on high school teachers. So they are coming. We had one on biodiversity, the concept and values, one on the Pampas, this is the extreme south of Brazil, one on the Pantanal, this is the flooded area, and tomorrow we are going to have one on the Cerrado, and then next month is going to be the Caatingas, the dry areas of the Northeast, and then we stop in July because it's holiday, and restarts in August with the Atlantic forest, the Amazon forest, and so on. So this is still going on. We also are putting a lot of effort on marine research that we did little in the first 10 years, and this included sharing. Para voltar por favor. Dois, na verdade. Mais esse. Sharing the costs with the climate change program of FAPESP to buy a new oceanographic ship. Working with ecosystem functioning, ecosystem services. This is how to really show how important biodiversity is. And also developing a new system. The information system we developed in '99 is old and needed to be rebuilt using new tools and crossing information with all the information that's available from barcoding to climate change models. Interoperability with international initiatives and also national initiatives. And this new system is being developed under a partnership with Microsoft Research. This was a 2-year project that we developed that we call it Symbiota 2.0. It was developed together with Professor João Midanis, that's from the Sila Informatica and also the Computer Institute of UNICAM. So this has been developed and it's being tested now. So using Big Mac, a catalog of life, a much more modern interface. You have it, it's possible to have it on your phone from the field if you are recording things. Also the question of typing different names of species or spelling of species, all that, you have dictionaries behind that, and the dictionary will tell you that you are writing it wrong, but you have the option to keep it if you think. So this question that was raised about new species, or I think this, if you say, are you sure that you want that? Yes, I'm sure. So this is different from what's in the data bank before, and it will include for the next registers. So this is now being used now for 6 months. I think all the bugs were solved, and finally we're going to put it in full use. So that's what I have to present, and if you have any questions. Okay.
Any questions?
I was just wondering, I was curious about the 5 patents. What are they about? The patents you guys have, the 5 patents, biota.
There are 3 patents on drugs that are for dengue. One is, we are looking at diseases that are not studied by large labs abroad. So for dengue, one is on malaria, and one is for control of some beetles on sugarcane. So different areas.
And who owns that? Is FAPESP or? It's
shared by FAPESP, the researcher himself, and the university or institute where he comes from. There's an agreement between FAPESP and that we all sign when we get some support from FAPESP.
One of the speakers yesterday mentioned that they were working in collaboration with the International Union on Conservation of Nature, and I was just curious, do you have any connections to them as well with this particular project?
Yeah, we are connected with them, so we are using data they use for classifying the species, and they are using our data bank to improve the classification of species, endangered species, distribution of species, and so on. We also made last year and this year again a joint call with NSF Dimensions of Biodiversity. We had 1 project approved last year. Now we have 3 on the competition, still being judged, and made 1 call in collaboration with Natural Environmental Research Council, NERC, from UK. That's got 1 project that's in the final stage of being evaluated. And partnership with Diversitas, and now with the new intergovernmental platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services. That's equivalent of the IPCC that's been established for biodiversity, to use our data bank, share our data bank.
Any other questions?
Is it the data available to?
Yeah, it's open. It's open. So if on the first slide there was the address of the biota.org BR. So if you go there, you have one of the options is to enter the data bank or to have more information about the program if you want.
Any other questions?
Juliana will have a question.
I will. And a comment. Well, I'm a big fan of the Biota project, and I think it's an exciting time, you know, as a scientist to be able to do research and advance the state of the art and to influence legislation and, you know, impact society. Mm-hmm. My question is, do you consider incorporating into the Biota any scenarios that can be enabled for by sensors, for example, like maybe to create, in terms of education, it would be very interesting to have a virtual lab where you can track animals and plants and humidity and all of that. That would be super cool, right?
That would be super. And not only the tracking possibility that you said, but also the citizen that Christian is developing on Life Andes. I mean, to have people participating on identifying or registering species and so on. That not only for the scientific purpose, but also for the educational purpose that it will have, the outreach that you have, is something that we surely would like to share more information with.
Okay, okay. Okay, so thank you, Professor Joly.